Chris, a 10-day break. How have you sort of enjoyed this little refresh in the middle of the season?
Yeah, it's been positive. We always think there's when you have a challenging part of the season, there's always a bit of a payoff. And we're quite accustomed to it because generally, well, not generally, we always play Easter Monday at the start of the year, so there are some short breaks leading into some long breaks. So we feel like we've got a pretty good program in that respect. I mean, you never really know, until you get into the game, but we had a good session today. All the indications are that we're pretty sharp. And because of that break, we have for a long time tended to think through these periods in the season and sort of how we manage our list, but we've got a few coming back through this period, but really the team's sort of pretty stable and availability is pretty good. So you would have seen Dangerfield training out there. He won't make the trip, but he's looking pretty close, so I think he's very, very likely for next week. Bo's a couple of weeks after that. And then we've got a couple of long-termers as well that we're thinking about how we integrate back into the team. So Cam Guthrie and Jack Martin played some VFL time last week. They'll play again. Connor O'Sullivan will come back into our squad. Mitch Nevitt will get some more VFL time. Jake College-Asney's not too far away as well. So I bring all that up to say that we have 4 weeks leading into our bye, but it is going to be a little bit of a juggle in terms of sort of how we manage our list. But this week after the 10-day break, we think we'll be pretty stable.
Do you have a clear idea when Cam might be potentially coming back? Have you got a clearer picture there?
Yeah, clearer, given he's played some VFL time now. So obviously we're not going to rush him. We'd like to see some. Look, we'd like to see more minutes is the simple version, but we tend not to have a really linear, rigid return to play program for those sort of guys. It will be a little bit dependent on sort of what we see over the next couple of weeks, but I think it's reasonable to say it won't be in the next week or two. But after that, kind of all options are on the table.
You sort of hinted at it, I guess there might be a bit more player management in the coming weeks. That becomes more of a consideration.
Well, I didn't mean to. I probably more meant to imply that we have a bit of a logjam coming with selection leading into our bye. So the imperative to manage guys through the middle of the season is mitigated a bit by having a bye. We can't think of too many examples of guys that we'd like to come out for more than one game. And it's probably more of a reference to the fact that we think we'll be taking in a pretty similar team, maybe with the exception of Connor O'Sullivan to last week.
Is there anything, slightly off-field question, but considering like the tragic connection between both clubs, is there anything happening regarding there with the passing?
Not that I know of, but it wouldn't surprise me that I'm sort of not across those things. Done.
Chris, ready to go?
No, if you're ready, go, Tom.
Thank you, Chris. The question just about George Stevens. Obviously, you've alluded to that you don't expect too much change to what you roll out against the Bulldogs, other than maybe kind of coming in. The body of work continues to build, doesn't it, for George? Yeah,
it does, and there's a few in that category. So George will be in the squad again. As always, we need to sort of think through, who we take with us, as an emergency. There's always that balance between keeping those guys a live option to play, which they'd always like to have on the table, versus getting some really quality minutes in the VFL. But George is right on the edge of our team and developing well.
The Cam Guthrie question was asked, but is Jack Martin following similar, or are they different in terms of the way you're looking at those two?
Different. Look, they might end up being similar, but that won't have been deliberate. We're looking at them as separate case studies, and they have their own individual circumstances. It was just coincidence that they came back in the same week.
Would Jack be a chance this side of the bye, or is that?
Yeah, we're keeping that on the table. Yeah.
Chris, I know you're heading to Perth this week, but you cast your eye further in this week, and 6 games at GMHBA in the second half of the season, you placed pretty well.
Oh, the coaches do a bit, but that's our job, but it's also our job to make sure that the players stay in the moment as much as possible. It feels like we've been in a tough part of the fixture. There's no doubt about that. But when I do project forward, it's it's hard to predict how teams are going to be going in any particular week. Everyone's had their moments this year, on their day they all look tough to me. So I think the takeaway is, and this is boring, but I think it's the reality. What we've done to this point is just give ourselves a chance to be amongst it. It's the old cliche that you can't win it, but you can play yourself right out of it in the first half of the year.
And you touched on player management before. Should we expect to see you resting players that, like Blitzarves, Duncan, Dangerfield? Should we expect to see you rest these guys more and more as you hit finals?
We're miles away from finals, but I think the last decade at least, maybe longer, it just has been our practice that we think about those things. So Danger just had a little hammy tweak just to get a little extra week in his mid-season holiday. But yeah, those guys, and they're all logical, the ones that are sort of in their 30s and ones that we think about a bit, but at the moment, so there is a longer term sort of macro view of those things, but it's always overridden by the short term and what's happening in the moment, and that's probably my reference to this week. Like those guys, Blitzarves is in rude health, Cameron's flying, so it's not really sort of absolutely on our mind, other than to say we feel like we've got some players coming back, and it's going to be hard to fit 28 into 23.
A word on Jack Henry, game 150 this week. He's been a great player for so long now.
Yeah, he has. And when we reflect back on when he came into the club, he's unique, obviously, and he's been terrific for us in the position he's played. But he is a bit representative of the type of player that we brought in. Not only the type of player, he's a Geelong boy, but he was a rookie. I don't think anyone was expecting him to come in and play the house down straight away. And over the course of 150 games, he's just become such an important player for us. And that's had to be part of our strategy. We had to back in our recruiting team, and our development team can find some players and develop guys who weren't necessarily early picks. And Jack's a nice example of that for all of us, I think.
Not sure how much media you consume, Chris, but your name has been thrown up by a few prominent journalists as being at the top of the list in terms of a coach who hasn't. Do you take much heed with these comments, and would you see that as an enticing position for a coach?
I think it would be enticing for a coach, but not as enticing as Geelong.
Another question. Look, I know you've spoken at length about Bailey Smith and the club's approach to not find players. And I know you can't give me all the state secrets or what have you, but do players get warned? Do they get warnings with these kinds of things?
No, they can do whatever they want. No, and I understand the question, and that's probably the part. It's nice to get the opportunity to clarify that bit. It's not as if the players get free rein and we just support them no matter what and defend the indefensible. But what we don't do is treat them like children, and we don't have expectations on them that are unrealistic. We'd like to think as much as possible that we very much work for them. They're professionals. Even our 18-year-olds are professional athletes. So some are more experienced than others. You do have to remember that guys that have been around for quite a long time in footy terms are still sort of young men kind of learning life's lessons. But again, like things like warnings and when it extends to penalties, just remind me of the way teachers treat little kids. And
Conversations.
Of course, and that's what I'm trying to explain. That in the same way that you and I hope, would have a conversation if we had a disagreement on the street, peer to peer, respectfully try to hear each other's side of the story and sort of move forward from there. This punitive approach to poor behaviour is something that, in my view, should be avoided at all costs. Now, society-wide, that's impossible. You can't do that. But when you have a relationship with people that you see every single day, especially when you have such a healthy respect for them as people and the way they go about the majority of their life, those things are pretty easy and not as complicated as I think people would like them to be. Now, there's always going to be that other side of the world where people enjoy seeing people get punished. And even if I take it a bit further, like and this is my personal view, I'm not necessarily representing the position of the football club, but I'm not sure we should be tipping into these people that choose to bait players or prominent people and take glee when they see them get punished. I'm not playing that game.
Over the duration of the past 2 weeks in particular, Bailey, the spotlight has been on Bailey. Has that challenged you in a coaching sense? Have you had to change the way you manage Bailey in any sense of?
No, but he's been in the news primarily because he's in brilliant form and was playing against his former team in one of the biggest games of the season. So, for the most part, really good reasons. Now, I think there are some minor tweaks, and again, the simple way of describing the interaction between our key people and Bailey has been one where he's kind of approached us and gone, I wish I hadn't have done that. We're like, yeah, we're a bit the same, but it's not a hanging offence. And then you sort of move through it. And but again, I just don't think we need ultra-conservative people, wagging their finger at Bailey. I appreciate your help, but we've got it covered.
Look, I'm sorry to ask this, Chris. This is not really your department, but
Yeah.
I have to ask.
I sense your hesitation.
Am I that transparent? No, I just, with the ongoing audit, Caroline Wilson, it's a pretty big story. I don't know whether you can make any comments regarding that if you're concerned, or it's really not something that you think about during your day-to-day life as a coach.
Oh, I wouldn't know whether it's a big story or not. I think that's a conversation that you could probably have better with the AFL. And it's up to them to verify whether it's actually a story or not. I haven't heard anything that suggests that that media commentary is accurate. So I'd first seek to get to the truth of it rather than believing what you hear in the media at face value. And but I can't refute it necessarily either because it's not really part of my remit. I mean, the question's probably better directed at our administration, who may be across stuff more than I am. But again, like if the AFL have shared some information with journalists that they haven't shared with us, we'd prefer it happened in the reverse order, but we certainly haven't heard anything that gives us any cause for concern. And when I say any, I mean as close to zero as you could imagine.
Do you think there's a degree of envy, though? It seems like some supporters are very quick to criticise the Cats because they've been successful for 20 years, so they'll jump on any small tidbit of controversy.
Supporters?
Supporters,
Yeah. I don't, with the greatest respect to the supporters, I don't really put too much thought into sort of how they feel. And I certainly don't sort of wonder why they might be, did you say annoyed or frustrated or critical?
Perhaps,
Yeah. I think the world we live in, it's like there are 18 teams in a really competitive environment. You tend to love your team and hope the others don't go that well. I understand the psychology. But yeah, for us to say, we think people are jealous of us, I think that would suggest that we're a lot more arrogant than we actually are.